All right, let's keep on practicing with some Bootstrap. I'm going to show you some interesting ways in which Bootstrap can handle images and some things to think about when dealing with images. But we're going to do this in the process of building a full Bootstrap page, which should be some nice practice for us. I'm going to start with what we already have, which is same nav bar with the danger colored background. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a web page all about hound dogs. So beagles, borzois, basset hounds, etc., etc. It's going to be about nothing but hound dogs. And this is just so we have something easy to start with. It doesn't matter what the content of your site is, especially when you're practicing. Pick a topic so that it gets the ball rolling. It gets you focused on something. But far more important than the content of your site, the text, the pictures, more important is your layout and the design choices that you make in that layout. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to change this nav bar here to, say, hound dogs. Or hounds. How about just hounds? All right, here we go. I'm not going to deal with these links up top in the top right yet. I'll deal with those later, I think. Now, first thing I want is I want a big splash image right below my nav bar. So I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com. And Bootstrap has a component called a Jumbotron. I honestly don't use Jumbotrons very much, but they're very easy components to use. It's literally just a big old hero splash container. A lightweight flexible component that can optionally extend the entire viewport to showcase key marketing messages on your site. Sure, alright, whatever. I'm going to take this fluid Jumbotron here, and I copied the code, and I'm just simply going to paste it right below my nav. Okay, it's nothing but a div with the class of Jumbotron and Jumbotron fluid. Save. Let's reload. Oh, okay. Looks like I already have some CSS at work. I do indeed. All right, so we already have a background image for the Jumbotron. Let me disable this real quick. Okay, so this is where we are after having pasted the Jumbotron code onto my page. And this H1 here actually has this display for class. I like these display classes. They're useful for text, but they're not necessary. A lot of people don't know about them, but they're a nice way to really quickly make your heading text look a lot nicer. If you haven't taken the time to choose fonts and really style your text yet. So what this display for class is doing is it makes the font size considerably larger. Okay, this is a display item. This is something that we want people to see. It's big. It also makes the font weight 300. And if you notice, all heading elements, H1, H2, H3, are bold. They're automatically bold. And in general, I personally don't like bold font. It tends to get very, very heavy and stick out in a way that you don't want your text to stick out. So the fact that these display classes, display 4, for example, makes your font weight a lot lighter right out of the gate is really nice. It also increases line height, but that's not going to be anything that we see unless we have multiple lines of text in this element. And even then, we're not seeing anything. But for me, it's that font size and font weight that makes a lot of difference. Now I'm going to change this to display 1. There's only 4 display classes, display 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, don't memorize. Just put it in your brain. This is display 1. It's the biggest. Let's go back to display 4. Okay, there we go. I'm going to leave it there. Not a big deal. Now, I do want this Jumbotron to be quite a bit taller. It feels pretty small to me. I could give the Jumbotron a specific height, but I don't really want to do that. Instead, I want to just space out what's already in there. So my Jumbotron looks like it already has a pretty thick padding to the top and bottom. That's what that green represents. So how else could I just very quickly throw in some additional spacing? Well, this is my container. There's a container inside my Jumbotron. How about I give that some padding as well? I'll give it padding to the top and bottom of 5. There, that made it a little taller. I like that. Now if I wanted to push it even more really quickly with Bootstrap classes, well, I could add some padding to my text as well. So let's add a padding top of 5 to my H1 and a padding bottom of 5 to my paragraph. There we go. Nice big fat Jumbotron. And now I'm just going to re-enable that background image in my CSS. And alright, we've got some beagles. Problem now is my text is really hard to read. Okay, I mean, this is really a design thing independent of Bootstrap. We've got our text inside the container. What happens if I give the container a background color? All right, that works. I could probably deal with that, but I don't want this background to be totally opaque. We can't see the image anymore. So I'm going to have to go into CSS for this. I'll leave that background light class there, but now I want to select this div in CSS and add so if I want to replace this opaque background color with a more transparent background color, I'm going to have to get rid of this Bootstrap class and do this part in CSS. I'm going to select the div, which is a direct child of my Jumbotron, and I'm going to give it a background color. And for this, I'm going to use an RGBA code. And these are codes that you can get from your inspector very, very easily, but it takes a value for red, for green, for blue, and finally for alpha. And that alpha allows you to set how transparent you want it to be. So 255, 255, 255, that's white. This is something you'll just pick up from experience. And then the fourth value is going to be how opaque do I want this color. 1 is maximum opacity, so that's what we have now. 0 is completely transparent, so I'm going to try something like 0.4. That gets us here. I could probably push that up 0.5. Okay, it's not bad. We can still see the image and appreciate the beagles. We can now more easily read our text. But let's also change the color of our text to match our nav bar for this Jumbotron. That's, it's a little better. I'll stick with it for now. And I'll try 0.6. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I'm okay with that. The only thing I want to do now is push the text away from the sides of this container. So I'm going to add to my container right here a padding to the left and right, px, of, let's try 3. That did almost nothing, so let's try 4. It's better. Let me just see what 5 looks like. Too much. I like 4. 4 will work. Okay. And I keep rethinking the opacity of this background color. Alright, I'm done. I'm not going to fiddle with it. There we go. We have our Jumbotron. It's got a container inside of it, which contains text. We've used a lot of Bootstrap classes here. Jumbotron, Jumbotron Fluid. If you want to know exactly what these do, you know how to find out. Open your inspector and take a look. A container. Remember, we already discussed containers in the video on Bootstrap's grid system. containers automatically render a margin to the left and right. So it makes sure that your content has a lot of negative space to the left and right. The negative space above and below the container comes from the natural padding of the Jumbotron. So it's pushing content inward. Then I added padding classes to my container to push the text away from the edges the way that I want. Our H1 has this display for class, which makes the font bigger and also lighter in weight. And it has padding to the top to push it even further down. So it's pretty well centered now. And my paragraph has this class of lead. You can find out what that does easily enough. And padding bottom of 5, which causes all of the containing elements here to be taller. When our paragraph has a thick padding to the bottom, it forces the element that contains it to grow taller, and the element that contains that to grow taller, etc., etc., etc. So these are really easy ways to very quickly lay down a layout that you're aiming for. So we have our Jumbotron. What's going to happen below our Jumbotron? Well, I'm going to go ahead and create a container. And we're going to feature 3 varieties of hound dog. So inside my container, I'm picturing here that we're going to have 3 columns sitting next to each other with an image and the name of a hound variety inside it. Okay, so inside of this container, below my Jumbotron, I'm going to create a row. And inside this row, I'm going to create 3 columned divs. Now I want them to sit next to each other, and right now I want them to be evenly sized, so I'm just going to start with columns 4. And I can come back later to add additional column classes to make them fully responsive if I need to. This is going to be my starting point, though. Now let's find an image for each of these columns. So I'm going to go ahead and find on Google Images a basset hound. And a show me a borzoi. All right, and a borzoi. And finally, what's going to be number 3? How about a greyhound? Okay. Okay, and beneath each image, I'm going to add an, let's do an H1. Let's give them all a class of display 4. See how that looks. And I'm going to insert the name of the variety of hound. That's not right. All right, I reload my page and stuff gets weird. This is happening because our images are quite large. And without any styling, our images are going to naturally try to occupy how much space they need to be their native resolution, their native size. Okay, so let's talk about what kind of Bootstrap classes we can use to control the sizes of our image. Well, one is a class of image-fluid. This is a very useful class for handling images in Bootstrap. And what this is going to do is give every image a maximum width of 100%. What you need to think about is 100% of what? And the answer is always going to be 100% of the parent element. So 100% of the 4-column div. All of these images are now going to be restricted to a maximum width of 100% of their containing columned divs. And they're going to scale with our page. Okay, so that's image fluid. It prescribes a maximum width to your elements. The only problem with image fluid is, let me show you something like this. Let me switch out my Greyhound image briefly for this one, which should be very small. Yeah, okay, this new Greyhound image is actually quite small. And at a screen size like this, the image is in fact smaller than the width of the div that contains it. It's smaller than the div of the width that contains it, and that's because the image file itself is a very, very small one. It's a very small image. In this case, we now have some inconsistency. We have two images which spread the full width of their containing divs, and one image which does not. Image fluid makes sure that these images have a maximum width. It doesn't make sure that they have a minimum width or a hard-coded width. So if the image is too small for the width of the containing div, it's not going to stretch all the way to the edges. That can be good. It can be very good. But if we want to make these images consistent, I would have to change the class of image fluid to a class of W-100. And now that's going to force the image to reach all the way across, even though it's starting to get a little pixelated. Okay, so that's the difference between W100. Can you guess what this class does? It gives the element a width of 100%. Not a max width, but a width. It forces the image to be 100% the width of its parent. So that's the difference between image fluid and W100. There are scenarios where you might need to use either or both. I'm going to go back to my original Greyhound image because it's nicer. And here we are. Now I've decided that display 4 is way too big for these headings here. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to leave them as H1s. And the reason is because H1s actually have some search engine optimization benefits. But I'm going to change their class to H6. Actually, no, we'll go for H4. Okay, so now these H1s have a class of H4, which means they're the size and styling of an H4, but the element is actually an H1. We have not talked about search engine optimization, and we won't, but when Google or any other search engine searches your sites, the heading ones are some of the most important elements. The content of the heading ones are going to be what it sees most and most prominently. So in this case, we're able to make sure that this text, Basset Hound, Borzoi, and Greyhound, is equally as important as Fluid Jumbotron. I should change that. Is equally as important as this text, but we're still able to style them exactly the way we want. We can still make them look as though they're H4s. Okay, and in addition to H4, I'm going to give them a font weight normal class. And this should make sure that they are not bolded, because I don't like bolded text. There we go. Now let's also center these H4s. Now I could apply a class to the individual H1 elements. Pardon me, they're not H4s, they're H1s. I could apply a class to these H1s to center them, or I could apply a class all the way up to this container if I wanted. Text-center. And this will apply text-align center to this div with the class container and everything inside of it. So that's going to center all of these breed names. Let's space them out a little bit. I'm going to choose to give each of these headings some padding to the top and bottom of 4. Let's try it on 1, see what that does. Okay, I like it. Padding y-4. Okay. Great. Now, if you want the images to be the same height, that's something that's going to require some custom CSS. So why don't we try that real quickly. In addition to the class of row, I'm going to give this row an ID of, let's go with featured. Okay. So now in CSS, I'm going to select the element with the ID of featured and the images inside of it. And I'm going to make sure they have a hard-coded height of 200 pixels. So they're all going to be 200 pixels tall. Now that's great, except did you see what happened to the Basset Hound? This is where we started from. Now let's go even smaller, 150 pixels. What's the problem? They're scaling. They're scaling appropriately. They're now 150 pixels tall, and their width is whatever it needs to be to allow them to be 150 pixels tall without stretching or squashing. Now that's great, usually, but if I still want these images to extend all the way across their divs, we now have a problem. And that problem is coming from image fluid, that max width issue. So let's change all of these to W100, because I want all of these images to be the same height and width. Okay, now they're all extending across their whole divs, but now they're stretching. Now they're stretching. I don't like that. So that's something I need to handle in CSS with the object fit property again. Object fit cover. And then they're the right aspect ratio. Now let's make them a little taller. Okay, no more squashing, no more stretching, but they're all identically sized on my web page. So far, so good. Now let's just space out this content a little more. I'm going to select my row, and I'm going to give it padding to the top and bottom of 5. Gives us a little more negative space to work with. Looks nice. Might even give some to the container itself. There we go. Now below this row of featured hound dogs, let's put in an image carousel. Okay, so I'm going to find where my row ends. I'm going to still be inside my container. Actually, no. Let's go outside of the container. and do this in a container fluid. So this is going to extend all the way across the web page. It's not going to have that automatic margin which container has. So I want to find an image carousel. So in components at getbootstrap.com, I'm going to look for carousel. And let's find one with controls, like this one. I'm going to copy the code. And I'm simply going to paste inside the container fluid I just created. Make sure everything is indented the way that I'd like. Okay. Now this is a lot of code to deal with, and it can definitely be intimidating. But it doesn't have to be. The reality is, these anchors here are your previous and next anchors. Your previous and next buttons. So these are the controls. We don't need to edit these at all. Thanks to Bootstrap and bootstrap.js, they're going to do what they need to do when they need to do it. The only thing you might need to change here is the href. Okay, the href for these anchors, both of them, is to this hashtag carousel example controls. Well, if you're not sure what that is, carousel example controls is the ID of the div that contains our entire carousel. So that's something you want to be aware of and watch out for if you're customizing a carousel. If I wanted to change the ID for this carousel and call it hound carousel, then in order to make sure that these next and previous buttons still work, I want to be sure to update the href of these two buttons, or these two controls. Everything else, it's fine, don't need to change it. And now all I need to do is insert the images that I want. So let's find some more hound dogs. How about an Afghan hound? Very, very dramatic looking dogs. Okay, so there's one. I'm going to change the alt. And how about an Irish wolfhound? Okay, there's two. And finally, it's going to be the last one. How about a dachshund? Or 3 dachshunds? Okay, let's check out our page. So, navbar, jumbotron, 3 featured images here, and a working image carousel with controls. Now, something that you will run into the second you start using carousels is all of these images are different heights. And so every time it switches to a new image, my page kind of shifts a little to account for it. And I don't like that. I think that's sloppy. So what I need to do is make sure Hound Carousel has a very specific height. So let's jump into CSS and do that. Hound Carousel. Let's give it a max height. Not even go for, well, no, let's give it a height. Height 500 pixels. Let's bring it in 300 pixels. Let's do overflow hidden. That's way too small. Much too small. Back to 500. So it was that overflow that was killing me. Okay, so now it's exactly 500 pixels in height, overflow hidden. So the height of this carousel is never going to change. I think we can even push it further. The images are not being squashed or stretched, so I don't need to worry about that. But if they were, I now know how to handle it, thanks to up here. What are some other last minute things I might want to change? Well, there's a little bit of white space around my carousel. I don't like that. The reason is because container fluids, even though they extend all the way across the page, they do have a tiny bit of padding to the left and right. So if I turn that off, there we go. So we've got a working image carousel. Let's give this container a bit of padding bottom so we're not smashed against the bottom of my page like that. There we go. All right, and we've got our first Bootstrap web page with all the trappings of a real business landing page. We've got a nav bar. We've got a jumbotron where we could easily put a call to action or a learn more button, a sign up button. We've got 3 divs side by side. Let's try and make those responsive now. Actually, they kind of look cool like that, but what we want is for these to probably start to stack at a small sized screen, right? So let's jump back to our columned divs and work backwards. If we want them to stack at an extra small and small screen, then we're going to want 4 columns starting from a medium screen. So let's start by editing those column classes. And then before them, I'm going to write the full column width that we want at a small and extra small screen. We're going to go for column 12, so it'll be the full width of the page. Okay, 3 and 3 across, and then they stack. It's a very dramatic cropping of the Basset Hound. I like it. Yeah, this turned out pretty good. I like it. Okay. And they work well as 12 column divs. Our text probably needs some work when our page gets very, very small, right? But that's an issue for another day. Okay, and we've got a full working, responsively behaving site. The image carousel still works. Everything looks good. So there you go. I hope that was helpful, not just for getting a little more Bootstrap practice and how to think about the Bootstrap classes, but I hope it was also helpful for some tips on handling images. These are very common issues that students run into with images, like a background image is just too strong or too bold, or images which get squashed or stretched when you try to fit them into prescribed containers, like something that is definitely 200 pixels tall, or something like an image carousel with a bunch of images that are differently sized, causing the website to jump every time an image switches. These are very, very common issues which you're sure to run into, so hopefully this gives you some direction on how to handle them. And hopefully this was as fun for you as it was for me, because I love hound dogs, especially beagles. All right, thanks for watching.